How many current Houston Texans players are core pieces 2 years from now? We'll get into that. Nick Caserio spoke at the scouting combine. He had some interesting things to say as the Texans approach a very pivotal offseason in the CJ Stroud era. Let's go in the locker room.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the locker room on YouTube. You know what it is. Let's get it. Hey. Locker room. Yeah, we in the locker room.
Nick Caserio speaks. Sometimes that's a boring thing. Sometimes it's insightful. Sometimes we just nitpick and try to figure out what the heck is going on. It is the locker room, number one source for Texans daily digital content. I'm Landry Locker. You can hear me Monday through Friday, 10 to 2 Central, Sports Radio 610, and the Odyssey app. We're going to get into how many players on this Texans roster fit into the 2-year plan. In other words, of all the guys, all the young guys, how many of them 2 years from now do we feel will still be core pieces? Because as we know, in the wild NFL, teams can fall off quickly. Players can fall off even quicker. The number may be lower than you'd think. Before that, though, let's hear from Nick Caserio and what Nick Caserio had to say at the NFL Combine. This was Nick Caserio talking about the market, windows, all that type of stuff. Here's Nick Caserio live from the NFL Combine in the locker room.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what that means.
He doesn't know what windows means. That's Jonathan Alexander.
Together
He knows what window means.
Sure.
Trying to elaborate on the CJ Stroud type of joint.
Free agency is case by case. So you look at the player, you look at his role, what's the value of the player, have an understanding of the market, what are your options, is that the best thing for the football team? In the end, we're going to do what we think is best for the Houston Texans team.
Heard that before.
D'Amico has said this countless times. I've expressed this countless times. It's not about one person. It's not about one player. Every year is different. We're not really believers in windows, not really sure what that means. So
Yes,
it's about the 2024 season, trying to put the best team together. What are our options? We'll explore our options, and we'll try to make good decisions, good sound decisions that make sense for our team.
He knows what windows are. The window really is basically the CJ Stroud rookie deal, and I think he focused a little bit on the windows. But let's hear more from Nick Caserio. This is Nick Caserio talking about reading the market, and this was actually one of my favorite things that Nick said. This is Caserio talking about reading the market, understanding the market, feeling out the market.
What does the market tell you? So, and then what are you? Any player, what are you willing to pay that player commensurate with their role? So every year markets change. And I think sometimes what happens is, I'd say with some of the tender numbers, you sort of get pigeonholed or benchmarked, because once you establish a certain financial commitment level, that's almost used as a starting point. So you're either comfortable paying that level or you're not. And it's all about resource allocation. So our job is to try to find good football players and add good players to our team. We have a couple of free agents at that position, so we're going to evaluate that position like we do other positions as well. And D'Amico talked about this yesterday. I mean, Motor had a great year, did a lot of good things for us.
Running back.
Motor's a free agent, so we'll see. We'll see how it goes. So there's a lot of good players that are out there. There's a lot of good players that are out there at a number of different positions, and our job is to evaluate and try to make good decisions.
And the running back thing is going to be interesting. That's been the most polarizing position up to this point. But I do think it's interesting when Caserio says, and I know he wasn't speaking on, the tight end or Jonathan Grenard, but when he said that, Nick Caserio said that, we're going to read the market and the market's going to speak. I think that mindset is what landed Dalton Schultz on the team last year. And I wonder, does that mindset matter? In other words, Dalton Schultz went out in the market. It was originally projected, and we use Spot Rack here, that he was going to get a 3-year, $33 million deal or something like that, something in that area. He didn't. And the Texans ended up getting him at a bargain last year. And he had a solid year. He had a good year. Was it much different than what we'd seen from him in the past? It was about what you would expect from a player of his caliber. So now with what the market is at tight end, and it's a little bit thin for sure in the draft, and it's definitely thin when it comes to free agency. Do you now go back to Dalton Schultz and say, okay, maybe we're going to pay him what we wouldn't have paid him last year? Has he shown you enough to do that? That's what's interesting. And if Jonathan Grenard wants this with the Texans, then he goes out there and the league says, well, you're worth this. Do they revisit that? Those are the interesting things that I find the most interesting thing when Nick Caserio talks. Speaking of the franchise tag, let's hear what Nick Caserio has to say about using that.
Anytime you assign a tag to a player, it's essentially you're committed to that value. Now, it doesn't mean you can't work out a long-term contract extension with that player, but it's sort of a fixed number. And I would say, kind of like I talked about a little bit earlier, it's almost a starting point in a negotiation. So you have to figure out, is that valuable? Does that make sense? Or let the player get to the open market, let the market dictate what the value is. So honestly, it's a little cat and mouse game. So you just try to take the information in, try to have a general understanding of the market, and try to make a good decision. We have some flexibility relative to financial commitments that we might be able to make, but you don't necessarily have to use all your money up in 1 year. So we've tried to, and I've talked about this previously, really look at your team in sort of 2-year increments.
The 2-year increments is interesting. That's what we'll get into. Let's try to look 2 years ahead. If Nick Caserio's looking 2 years ahead, let's look 2 years ahead. It might provide you with some interesting thoughts as to why perhaps Nick Caserio would be a little bit cautious with how he approaches things. 2-year window, that's going to spark the conversation on the back end.
Whatever you don't do this year, that money's going to be used in future years.
Yes.
I'm sure I'll get a question here very soon about Nico Collins. That's coming. So that could be a player that maybe he's a part of the future. So you're dealing with the present. You're focused on the short term, but part of our responsibility is to kind of think ahead a little bit. So, and just try to make good, sound decisions for the team and the organization.
I'm really intrigued by these windows, the 2-year windows, and there's a lot of angles for Nick Caserio right now. This is probably a little bit fun for him. Process over results. That was what we were early in the Caserio era. Now we're talking about windows, which he says he doesn't know. He's lying there. And we're talking about franchise tags. We're talking about 2 years down the line in an exciting way, not in a blind faith type of way. There's more
decisions for our team. Brooks, go ahead.
Brooks Cabina, we miss you on that beat. God, the beat misses you. Shout out to Brooksy.
Yeah, it's interesting. So it doesn't necessarily change how we're going to approach this offseason. We were already in a decent position. So, and I would just say it's probably potentially could be more of a one-time thing. So depending on what the number is, maybe gives you a little flexibility. Could be add a singular player, could be add multiple players at a certain tier or level. Whether or not you use the money this year and push it to next year and roll it to next year. So I would say the result of what happened the other day doesn't necessarily change
Talking about cap
our
space.
thought process about how we were going to approach free agency.
Let's get into the wide receiver before we get into this 2-year window thing. Let's hear Nick Caserio on the wide receiver position. Then we'll get into this 2-year window, which might be interesting, and Nico Collins will be a big part of it.
Where that manifests itself the most is on third down, because typically there's a lot more man coverage played on third down. The coverage is going to be a little bit tighter. Some can win with quickness, some can win with their size, some can win with their speed. So I think it depends on the player and his skill set. You know, how Tank Dell gets open and run routes. I mean, it's very unique. How Nico runs routes and gets open is very unique to him. So how you're going to use that player, how you're going to deploy that player. Do you need a formation a certain way? Can you only align them in one spot? So you just have to look at the player. But in the end, the job of a receiver is to get open and catch the ball however they do it. So however they create that space and separation is going to be unique to whatever skill set they provide to your team.
All right, there you go. That's Nick Caserio. So he's talking about fit, mix. Like, what is the mix? What do they need with Nico Collins and Tank Dell? I think you can say pretty much anything you can make fit, because 3 through 5, the wide receiver room with the Texans right now, the guys they got under contract, is one of the worst in the league. And that, again, Noah Brown not under contract. You're probably going to try to find someone like a Noah Brown somewhere out there. John Mechie really hasn't established himself as a quality NFL receiver, and Xavier Hutchinson's a little bit raw. Those guys could come in and have good years, but the overall depth of the wide receiver room is very slim. Who fits into this 2-year plan for the Texans? Who are the guys that we can unequivocally say, yes, these guys are going to be a part of the Texans, a strong part of the core when we're in the locker room 2 years from now? Not the Texans locker room, this locker room. Who are the guys? I have 6, and maybe I'm missing some guys, but I have 6, and I think you can make a case for 7, maybe 7. But there are 6 guys 7 guys, 6 or 7 that I think will be a part of this thing 2 years from now. And I'm not even putting Nico Collins on the list. I don't know what Nico Collins is going to be. I don't know what he's going to do. I don't know how he's going to follow up his one productive season. I don't know if he's going to be able to stay healthy. I'm optimistic about Nico, but because he's not under contract, I'm not going to put him on this list. And quite frankly, if the Texans drafted someone in the first round and you told me he ended up being in the same stratosphere, same caliber as Nico Collins, it wouldn't be the craziest thing to where maybe the decision, assuming they don't lock him up next year, is a little bit more difficult. Hell, people were arguing about Tank Dell and Nico Collins before Tank went down as to who was the number one. The wide receiver group reason for optimism, but I think you need to have some caution as well. Number one on the 2-year plan, CJ Stroud. That goes without saying. He's going to be under contract. He's actually going to be eligible 2 years from now for an extension. You got to think they might proactively try to get that done. So number one is CJ Stroud. Number 2 is Laramie Tunsil. Laramie Tunsil's locked up. He'll be perhaps even looking for another payday, but I think it's safe to say Laramie Tunsil, he's number 2. He will be here. Number 3, Tank Dell. Tank Dell will be here. He'll be heading into the final year of his rookie deal, whether he's your 1 through 3 wide receiver. I think Tank Dell, assuming he can stay on the field, he's going to be a part of things. So that's number 3. Number 4, Derek Stingley. Derek Stingley, if he stays on the field and he does what he did on the back end, you're talking about perhaps one of the highest paid corners in football. Derek Stingley, it's going to be interesting to see how he follows up what he did last year, but he's number 4. Number 5, Christian Harris. 2 years from now, he will actually be a free agent. If he keeps playing the way he is and he keeps bonding with D'Amico the way he has, D'Amico's not going to let him go. The sky's the limit for Christian Harris. Number 5, Christian Harris. Number 6, Will Anderson. Same thing, same situation as CJ. Will Anderson. Love the guy, friend of the show. Will Anderson, number 6. And number 7 is a maybe Juice Scruggs. I could see Juice Scruggs establishing himself as perhaps the long-term center, but that's it. I mean, and that's what you got right now. And there's a lot of reason for optimism. There's a lot of chances here, but with how quick the league turns over, and again, you can throw Nico on this list. Let me know who you think. Put it in the comments. Who do you think fits in this 2-year plan? Did you take anything from Nick Caserio and wonder, how they're going to approach stuff? I'm starting to wonder about Dalton Schultz, and if they don't have their eye on someone perhaps that they think can play the position, maybe more complete, maybe a little bit better blocking. Who knows? Will they let the market speak to Dalton Schultz? I don't anticipate a franchise tag. Who the hell knows? It's all speculation at this point, and before we know it, free agency will begin inside of a couple of weeks. Appreciate everyone for coming through. Subscribe, like, right along. What did you make of Nick Caserio? Who fits in your 2-year window? This has been The Locker Room on YouTube. Have a good weekend, everyone. I'm hitting the rodeo.
YouTube, you know what it is. Let's get it. Hey, Locker Room. Yeah, we in the locker room. Texas talk. Yeah, you know what we about to do. Localize every angle's what we really do. We the source, we the pulse of the city too. Landlocked, got the game in the headlock. Localize every time, can't stop, won't stop. Yeah, we top 2 and we not 2. Plugged in daily digital on YouTube. We got